home plate, in between the stands and the fencing. And so the 3 or 4 of us that were on the ground made a sound decision to take our chance of getting shot while we were running as opposed to lying there, because if we'd lied there, he'd have been, when he got to that point, we'd have been 10 to 15 feet from him and like sitting ducks. But the Capitol Police engaged. They were successful. They took him down somewhere behind home plate. I don't know the exact location. All this is going on. We know that there are other wounded, particularly Steve Scalise, who immediately after the first shots glanced over in that direction. He was on the ground. There's a lot of shouting, an active shooter.
Is that the first time you noticed he was shot?
I noticed he was shot as I think I heard his voice scream, "I've been shot," or "I'm hit," or something to that effect, or someone else might have said Steve Scalise has been hit. But within the first 3 or 4 or 5 shots, I was cognizant of him being hit, and I was running around to try to get behind the batting cage. I could see him on the ground, on the dirt in the second base infield part of the infield where a second baseman would play. And you can see him trying to drag himself with his arms towards right field. He could not walk, he could not get up, he couldn't even crawl, but he was slowly dragging himself about a foot at a time towards the right field grass. So at some point, again, it seemed like forever, we're in the dugout. Someone shouts, "Shoot her down, shoot her down." Of course, you don't know if there's one shooter or more at this point. Often there are multiple attackers. You don't know if it's a lone wolf. 1 or 2, maybe 3 people. I remember Jeff Blake being one of them. I don't remember who the other 1 or 2 were. They ran out to where Steve Scalise was. A second or 2 later, I ran out of the dugout towards Steve Scalise. So I was about the 3rd or 4th person to Steve Scalise. The first 2 came to where Steve's head was, and he was lying on the ground now in the outfield. There was a blood trail about 15 yards long. They were talking to him, trying to let him know that we were going to do what we could. As you can imagine, with blood loss, he was asking for fluid, so someone went and got him water or Gatorade or something.
Gatorade.
He seemed to be going into shock, as I perceive shock to be. I'm not a doctor. But he was conscious the whole time. I was at his waist on the center field side of his body. His body was facing center field, where the blood was coming out of his hip wound. We have, above my head, half the assailant across the infield, as we're down low, and he's exposing himself a little bit so he can get all shots using the dugout. Now, he gets hit, as does Crystal Griner. But after the shooter is down, and before we have all the other law enforcement coming to help protect us, David Bailey, he's limping. He's limping. And he goes to Steve Scalise to check on him. That's a hero. His duty was to take care of Steve Scalise, who had been shot. And, we had to shoot him away because he was shot himself. As Brad Winstrup, who's the doctor at this point, was trying to tend to Steve Scalise with the hip wound. I was applying pressure as Brad Winstrup, pressure to the wound with the cloth as Brad Winstrup was trying to cut the pants. But to see David Bailey come out there limping because he too had been shot, check on Steve, I'll never forget that. And the heroism of those 2 people risking their own lives to protect those that they were sworn to protect. And anytime people, and it's not just Capitol Police, but when you think of law enforcement throughout the country and the risks they take to protect our lives, and then you see some of the things we've seen over the last few years where before the evidence is known, they come under political attack, it should anger every American.
Yeah.
Because these law enforcement officers, whether they're deputies, state troopers, FBI, fielding practice, I came in to bat. Normally I stay out in the outfield, left field during fielding practice, but for some reason this time came in. As it turned out, that was a lucky, fortuitous decision because the shooter was on the third base side, and if I'd been in the outfield, I had no place to run. The fencing around this particular field is about 10 feet high, so there's no escape. I did come in and I took some bats. I put on a helmet. I was on deck. I took the third base side of home plate where we had a batting cage, which means I was pretty close to the shooter because he was just past the third base dugout, probably about 60, 70, maybe 80 feet away. I heard the first blam, and at first I thought it was a car backfire. I looked around, and I saw what appeared to be a stick-like object poking pretty close to the chain link fence, shooting at what turned out to be a gun, shooting at a 90-degree angle towards the shortstop, second base, right field positions. It took me a fraction of a second and about 3 more gunshots to figure out a couple of things. One, that's a gun. 2, he's aiming to kill as many of us as he can. And 3, if I can see him, he can see me. At this point, I could see the shooter. I could see the rifle. And if he had turned 30 degrees to his right, I'd have been the closest target for him to shoot at.
How far away was he from you?
Well, I was
30
between
yards?
home plate and third base, probably 15 feet up the third base line, and he was probably even with third base, just past the third